Joining us now to look back on his career in the last quarter century is former Fed Chair Alan Greenspan. It's good to have you with us. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be with you.
And what do you think, looking back on the last 25 years, was your greatest moment and your biggest regret?
Well, the greatest moment really was a whole period from 1987 forward, because remember, we were in a period of significant decline in long-term interest rates, and that enabled us to maintain a increasing policy of growth, thanks in large part, to Paul Volcker's putting inflation under control earlier. And so that what we were looking at was both something good and something which made us a little nervous. We liked it very much to see the economy moving forward in an extraordinarily long period of rapid growth. But we also knew, because we talked about it at the time, that very successful monetary policies inevitably lead to bubbles. Fortunately, not all bubbles are toxic. In fact, the dot-com boom, as you know, was an extraordinary major collapse in equity prices, and there were huge capital losses, but they were not leveraged. And as a consequence, if you look at the period immediately subsequent to that crash, the economy did reasonably well. And we had a very, very mild recession.
You know, Chairman Greenspan, I'd like to have you look at today's economy rather than back at the one of the past 25 years. But in light of what you just said, we had a long period of very, very nice growth and incredible job growth for much of that period through the late 80s into the 90s and even into the first part of this century. Why do you think we're having such a hard time getting back to those levels of growth and especially employment? What's wrong?
Well, if you look at the data, what you find is that what is wrong is that assets with life expectancies, like long-term construction, long-term equipment manufacture, and the like, have essentially fallen to half of where they were, and they've been that way for 5 years. If you take 2 or 3 percentage points out of the GDP semi-permanently, which is what we have done, you're going to have the type of stagnation we've seen.
In other words, nobody's investing in new plant and equipment? Is that what you're saying?
No, they are investing in new plant and equipment, provided it's short-lived. Software, for example, is doing exceptionally well. Equipment of short-lived assets are doing well. But anything which requires income coming from a very long-term investment is doing extremely poorly. Non-residential construction, as you know, is dead in the water, despite the fact that commercial asset prices are rising somewhat surprisingly.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't hear you say what your biggest regret was. Do you have any regrets from your tenure?
Oh, yeah, of course. Many. I think the most important one was the fact that we had known, as we got into the period 2003, 2004, that we were skirting on the historically thin ice. I, in fact, at a Jackson Hole conference, very nervously made the statement that we've been seeing protracted low risk premiums for a very long period of time, and history does not look kindly on protracted periods of low risk premiums. I thought I would upset the market in doing that, because it was not the type of thing that Federal Reserve chairmen usually do, and I very rarely did that. But I thought it had to be said, but it didn't make any difference because nobody was listening.
So do you think we're in that kind of situation today? Would you then have conducted policy differently then, and are you taking some blame for what happened with the ensuing boom and collapse in the economy?
Well, I'm certainly aware of the fact that we did not know we knew that there was a bubble out there. What we didn't know was the extent to which it was going to collapse. And had we known that, we obviously would have taken different types of actions. But these types of things happen once in a lifetime. This was the most extraordinarily major financial crisis in history. It's true that economic declines in the 1930s were far more than what we're getting now, but the crisis was the first time that overnight credit literally disappeared because markets broke down. That is the type of phenomenon which we almost never see. We've never seen it before. The last time the short-term money market shut down was for one day in 1907, and it opened up the next day. What I'm trying to say is that this was a very unusual crisis. You're asking whether the Fed was involved in it? Well, there's a very big argument with respect to whether or not our policies in the early 2000s were too inflationary. I submit that we did move the rates down because we were fearful as price inflation was falling for very much the same reasons that people are worried today about deflation. But the most important issue is despite the fact that we lowered rates, we did not have long-term rates moving down. We did not have money supply accelerating. There are no fingerprints of an easy money policy in the marketplace. And so while it could have been, and we could have been very culpable at that time, but I think I've made lots of mistakes in the 18 and a half years I was with the Fed. I don't think that one was one, and I don't think that we were, as an organization, significantly involved in what was happening in the global markets. Remember that we had a housing price boom of about the same order of magnitude of Australia and Canada. Neither one of those had the types of problems we had, largely because of the very toxic market that emerged with respect to subprime mortgages. I know people think that we were involved in that, but the evidence is that we were not.
All righty. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Alan Greenspan.
No one more central to what happened with the economy over the last quarter century.